Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 134 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. Got a good group with me today, including Bill Sutton, for our one listener that likes to say I pick on Bill too much. Bill is our Director of Services. Bill, I asked you in our management meeting a few minutes ago if we had that summer slowdown happening, and you said, doesn't seem like it.
Haven't seen it. Doesn't look like it at this point anyways. Forecast looks good.
Yeah. What do you think is driving that? Just more XenTegra business, or the world's got a lot going on?
I think there's a lot of migrations. Folks are finally embracing the cloud and starting to consider moving that direction. Not to mention the change stance that Citrix or Cloud Software Group / Citrix has taken with regard to embracing hybrid. So customers are more willing to do the upgrades since they're not being effectively, quote unquote, forced into the cloud. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing a lot of migrations and upgrades lately.
So when you say that, you're talking about like on-premises upgrades as well as cloud migrations?
Mm-hmm.
Both. Well, I've got Todd Smith and Geremy Meyers, both from Cloud Software Group Legacy Citrix folks, been around a long time, very knowledgeable. Guys, do you have any thoughts or comments on Bill's take on what we're seeing for project work?
Actually, I do have some questions about that, only because it's just not like when I asked my son to do something and he doesn't want to do it because I asked him to do it. And now that I've said, hey, you know what, you can choose to clean your room or not, and he'll decide, you know what, I think I will clean it after all. I'm not sure. But, at the end of the day, we're not so focused on whether or not you get to the cloud, because I think where we've landed is hybrid is the landing spot, which sounds a little bit markety. I get that. But, Andy and I, we've talked about this for a long time, which is, we had a lot of folks who have, forklifted themselves to the cloud and find themselves not coming all the way back on-prem, but kind of finding the medium that makes sense. Sometimes it is all the way back on-prem, but sometimes it's just a mixture of whatever makes sense for your business. And so the fact that, you're not seeing that aggressive push from Citrix to get to the cloud and kind of instead do what's right for your business, that's a great idea. Folks feel a little bit, it's okay, do what you got to do. I think the licensing supports that. And, I think we've just come into a scenario where, 7.15 went end of life last year. I still talk to customers who are trying to get off of that, and they're just kind of making the move at their own pace.
Yeah, I think to add on to Jeremy's comment and question there, we're seeing a lot of folks, and I'll call out the Canadian government for this. They've actually backtracked from the cloud first approach to what they refer to now as cloud smart. And what that means is they will use cloud when necessary, but it's not a mandate anymore that everything has to go cloud first. And we're seeing this across the board, right? We're seeing this from customers in commercial spaces. We're seeing it from enterprise customers. We're seeing it from our public sector customers across the board. They're saying, we want to use cloud as it's appropriate for us. And if you were to take the cloud word out of there and say, we want to be hybrid, we want to have the opportunity to pick and choose what workloads and what use cases fit into a cloud delivered service or a on-prem service.
Right.
So there's a maxim in technology that says we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the course of 12 months and underestimate what that is in 5 years. I think folks tend to have a knee-jerk reaction and move all in one direction, only to find out that maybe that doesn't make sense. But over the course of 5, or in this case, probably 10 years, I think we'll see this is just the natural landing spot for what we call the cloud, which is just a mixture of wherever it makes sense to host workloads, right? And then it becomes, how easy is it to kind of move things around in and out of these clouds, which, so we talked about this last week, Bill and Todd, which was, kind of some of what Nutanix is doing, the Nutanix cloud clusters, the idea that there's a sort of a standardized platform that allows you to do that, makes it easier, hopefully, because clouds are sticky. What you retool and refactor for one cloud does not exactly make sense in a different cloud. So you've got to retool again. There's a cost to going that direction. So if you can move things around.
Yeah. I never really thought about it. When you talk about cloud, a lot of people, especially when you talk about IaaS, is just somebody else's hardware in some other data center, right? And as I say that out loud to myself, it's just somebody's hardware and maybe their software, but it doesn't necessarily have to be their software. It's just really their hardware in that other cloud that we're taking advantage of. And that makes sense in some cases, but like you guys point out here, doesn't. And Citrix has realized that buying into the idea that everybody must go to the cloud and that's right for everybody has really been eye-opening. And now we're starting to see the results within the customer base.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really going to blow your hair back is, we're talking about, to your point, IaaS, right? I mean, as folks retire legacy Windows apps, when they're traditional Windows apps, right? And then they replace them with cloud native, a PaaS option, just different modalities for these apps. I mean, I just think hybrid takes on even a different tone than what we're talking about right now.
Yeah. It's everything hybrid, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you also, two other things that kind of factor into this cloud first or cloud native or cloud smart approach is, the maturity of the organization, right? So the customer, most customers who are smaller and have been around for less than 5 years, they don't have on-premise data centers. They have almost everything that they've done has been cloud native. Whether you're talking about startups or whether you're talking about, a company that's been spun off that said, hey, we don't want to go out and build all this infrastructure. And the second thing is, it's the size of the organization. These larger enterprises, they've invested millions and millions of dollars into data centers that are amortized over 20 plus years, that financially it doesn't make sense for them to move out of those data centers. And you mix those two factors together, and then you also mix in the concept of, the workforce being a lot more agile, a lot younger, where they don't know what a Windows app is sometimes. They've done everything in a web or SaaS-based application stack.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry about the desktop.
Yeah, my daughter's interning with us, and I got an email from our HR team a while ago with an email I was supposed to respond to as if the email was the template. And I looked at her and said, this is what I'm dealing with on a daily basis, people that still think email is workflow. And it shouldn't be at this point. And next generation won't think by default an email workflow is getting stuff done appropriately.
Yeah. Well, if you look back at it, I mean, most people communicated when we, sorry, I'm going to date ourselves here, but when we say that we started off and the phone and memos in Holy Joe envelopes were those were the ways that people communicated.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden we introduced email. Then we introduced voicemail. It's now, it's yet another loop in this continuous spiraling of the way companies are evolving. But Andy, you're spot on. 5 years from now, we're probably not going to be using email. Email is going to be more of a backup form of communication, form of getting a workflow done.
Yeah.
Than we currently have. I mean, everything is going to be form-based and flow-based.
Yeah, you hope so. But it's going to take? It's going to take us, people our age, maybe slightly less technical people our age, to retire so that the leadership becomes the next generation that sees workflows as the answer. Which, I don't know, I just got back from the ServiceNow conference last week. I'm all in. Well, okay, so this is great. And how do we get to those workflows? How do we consume those workflows? How do we assign those workflows? I think that ties into today's topic. Bill, you want to take that tee up and
that was a great segue, by the way.
Explain why I mean that?
Yeah, that was really a good segue. So the article that we're going to cover today is entitled "Level Up Your Citrix Workspace Environments with a New UI." This is covering some changes that Citrix is making to the user interface in the Workspace app to help reorganize things and make it easier for users to navigate.
I find this fascinating because there's several, many workspace companies out there, and watching them try to come up with a UI that's more conducive to the workflows and natural feeling to the end user and drives business forward. I just struggle with how you do that, and I'm not a UI guy, so I have no idea how to do that.
Yeah, and I should reframe what I just said. This is actually the Workspace user interface from the cloud perspective, not necessarily the Workspace app, although I imagine it will reach that eventually, right, guys from Citrix?
That is correct. That is
Okay.
correct. So what gets built and what we're going to go through today is the web UI for sure, but this also
Right.
makes it into the Workspace app as well.
Right.
So before we jump into that, when we brought up this topic, I felt like mine has looked a little different. And maybe I'm making this up, but maybe last night I logged in from my iGel laptop using the Citrix Workspace, and it did look different, but maybe I'm just making that up. Geremy, we looked on my computer here a few minutes ago, and I did not have a new UI.
You don't have the new version.
What's the path forward to get this thing we're getting ready to talk about? Maybe I'm getting.
So there is in this blog post, there is a way to get this turned on. There's a Podio form that you can fill out. So it'll ask you what your customer ID is and your store URL. Again, if you don't know how to find this, it is in your cloud.com. You can go into your cloud tenant and go look this up in your account settings. But ultimately, you can fill out a form and actually have it turned on if you don't have it.
Well, then maybe I got ahead of us with that conversation. Let's come back to that since it's in the actual blog. So, Todd, why do you think Citrix is refreshing and changing the way the user interface for the workspace is?
I think, first of all, a lot of this came from talking with customers and hearing and getting feedback from our customers about they want to simplify the user experience as much as possible, right? They want to have one place to go to get all of your apps and services and data and things like that, right? You want to be able to have, instead of having to go to different URLs, you want to have one single landing page. And think of it as when we first started rolling out intranets and extranets. It was that one web portal to jump to get access to. It could be a Windows app, it could be a web platform, it could be a variety of different data sets, but it really kind of gave you that one place to go. And if you look back, it was very, the 3-panel display that used to be web interface. It was very functional, but yet very structured and static, right? And it required someone on the back end to go and have to manipulate what showed up in any of the 3 panels, right? What showed up for icons. And if you moved an icon, it created a whole bunch of change for the user. Now, move this forward to when we introduced the workspace in the old Citrix receiver, where we said, hey, what shows up on your iPhone will show up on your tablet, will show up on your thin client, will show up, it'll have that same look and feel. So once again, responding back to what those users and what the feedback that we got. People nowadays want to go and say, hey, I'm going to hit the portal and I'm going to hit my workspace and I'm going to put the applications and the icons where I want them. And some of it's going to be very user-centric, right? Without a lot of, you don't have to open up a ticket to get an icon moved around on your desktop. Right? We're opening that up. And part of it is it's also changing the way it looks and feels, right? Where, giving it a little bit easier on the eyes, a lot less requirements for someone to teach you how to go through it. It's very much, kind of learning as we go, that cognitive science of how people start learning new process. They learn by doing. And if we make it easier for them to figure that out, hey, we're going to have a happier user experience, more adoption.
Yeah. Geremy, how much of this is related to the lack of the needs for maybe some of those actions and other things that came out of what was the integration called where we started bringing in like action?
The micro apps is what you're
micro
talking
apps.
about.
Yeah. So I guess some of that needed to be cleaned up too.
Yeah, I think that's probably the half of this for sure. So I think there's 2 things to this. Is number one, the workspace UI needed a refresh because of the fact that, we're not doing micro apps anymore. So that's something that has been deprecated. So let's get that out of workspace. And secondly, files also gone from workspace as well. So, we got to simplify the UI. We pulled some things out. Maybe this is a good chance to redesign what this looks like, which has happened. And then secondly, by the way, I had to look this up because I was curious. We introduced Workspace in 2018. So this thing's been out for 5 years, so to speak. And in that time, I've had customers come to me no less than 11 billion times to tell me, when am I going to get some of the groupings that I had with storefront on-prem into Workspace?
Yeah.
By God, we've got it 5 years later, right? So it was a chance to sort of redefine this. I was actually in on some of the working groups, I guess at some point last year where, there was a few different versions of this that were kind of floating around. Again, this is UI. This is super impactful to what an end user sees. And so we got to get this right because we can't keep changing this because that impacts our end users, right? So a lot of customers wanted to know, what's the future of the workspace? Granted, you've got Studio and you've got web interface. You get the back end nailed. What are my users going to see? We've got some input. So, between the fact that we had to deprecate some things and the fact that we were pulling some storefront features into the cloud, it was kind of a good time to just revisit the whole thing, which is kind of what we have here, those two pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, Bill, I have to assume for you, this going back to a newer look, but some of the older concepts of how we group things together, it's a familiar friend.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that when I was actually doing the implementations, and even now, is users will log into the Workspace app and they get a blank page and they have to go over and say, where are my apps, where are my desktops, and this kind of eliminates that in the sense that it shows them groupings based on the admin, so we can help the admin set that up for them, and then they can favorite things and keep them in the foreground. So it kind of puts the noise in the background, but also has very aggressive search capabilities. So it's definitely a huge step forward, and I think customers are really going to like it.
Yeah, there's something that you just said, Bill. That was the other thing that tried to get solved here as well. So with the old workspace, when you logged in for the first time, you saw nothing.
Right.
No apps, no desktops, fine, right? Because what you saw when you first logged in was your favorites. So what did folks do? Well, they'd go hit apps. They'd go find the apps they needed to use. They wouldn't necessarily favorite anything, just launch the app. So what happened the next time they logged in? It didn't show their favorites. You could go click recent, but again, that's a different click.
Right.
So what's also been included here, and I don't think there's a screen grab in the blog post, but the first time you log in, there's a first time user workflow that lets you go through and highlight and click the apps that you want to favorite. And that's what shows up. Now, you can still do, I haven't seen the documentation yet, but I got to assume you could still do things like mandatory apps. In fact, I just read that, so that is true. So you could force some things out, but I think the idea is to redefine the user experience here as well from a onboarding perspective.
So this next section here talks about streamlined app and desktop view. I think we've covered that, and that's what we're talking about, getting back to our roots here, where apps, desktops, just a simple click. You didn't, as Geremy pointed out, you didn't just show up on a page full of nothing that you had to populate yourself. Anything else to cover on that, Todd?
No, I think it's pretty much straightforward. I do like the fact that we brought back some of the groupings capabilities. Kind of presetting some of the applications out there that people need to use especially as a first-time user. The other big thing is, everyone's going to be using workflows differently, right? And personal workflows, right? Not a process-based workflow, but hey, what are the applications that I use every single day that I'm gonna, the next step I think is going to be more along the lines of intelligently populating some of those things. Hey, here's the applications that you use an awful lot. And certainly from an admin perspective, I need this telemetry information to realize, what applications are being utilized the most, so that way I can actually put some resources to those. And on the converse of that is understanding what applications are never being used. Yeah. Why am I paying for something that's never used? Those are some critical things to know from an administrative perspective as well. So it's not all just about the user. Some of these things are going to be helpful for us on the admin side.
So, Geremy, one of the sections in here calls out fuzzy search. I've never heard it called fuzzy search, but it makes sense. What is fuzzy search and why does it matter?
So, I guess from a couple of different perspectives. Number one, I think the old search kind of required you to be accurate, right? If you're looking for Excel, you got to type Excel. If you're looking for Word, you type Word. But let's be honest, some folks log in, they want Word, but they type in Office, right? How do you make sure the right things show up? Or better yet, just contextual, or you start typing in a word, it figures out the rest. I'm hoping, I don't know if it calls this out here, but what if you kind of fat finger Excel? I'm notorious for spelling the wrong words over and over. So even if you got close to typing Excel, would it kind of assume that's what you meant, right? So you don't have to be super accurate anymore, which...
Yeah.
going to bug a little bit of me, but let's face it, that's just how we do.
Yeah, I mean, as a guy who can't spell, that's extremely valuable when that's happening for me. And it seems to be happening more and more all over the internet.
Yep. By the way, there are certain words that I just cannot spell. Every single time I spell it, I get it wrong. You ask me to spell the word acquire, I am going to booger that up every single time.
Yep.
I will Google a word.
You forget there's a C in there.
I forget there's a C in there. Yep. Every single time.
So
I get screwed up when I type in receiver. I forget the whole I before E except after C type of
receiver.
Yeah. I'm sure I went to third grade 3 times.
Went to a buddy of mine's house, I don't know, 25 years ago, and his girlfriend at the time was a school teacher, and he was in sales. And this is back when he had like a folder on top of his desk, on top of his counter at home that said receipts. Said he misspelled receipts. Like, crap, I've been misspelling receipt all this time.
Yep.
So, Bill, assuming you read ahead, tell us about this new activity manager thing.
Yeah, this is the part I really like of this, and this is an interface that's within the web environment that allows the user to see the apps that are running and desktop sessions that are running from within the workspace versus having to use some other method. And then it looks like they can interact with them, so they have the ability to switch, I presume, to be able to click and switch between apps from the workspace interface itself. So really a really neat, cool feature that I think again will help end users.
It's funny.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I would say it's funny. There's things like this where you go, "Holy smokes, man! Why wasn't this rolled out eons ago?" Right? It's such a cool feature. Yeah.
And honestly, I thought some of it had been because it was such a no-brainer, and maybe it's just the way I work that I'm in and out and gone. I thought a lot of these things, they're no-brainers, things that definitely should be there. Todd, it says at the bottom, and I know you're a fan of this sustainability and how this helps achieve better sustainability. What does that mean?
Yeah, so getting back to those insights that the administrators can actually get of what are some of the applications and resources that are no longer being used or not being used to their fullest, right? Why have those up and running if you're never going to use them? As we're continuously looking to improve, the cost effectiveness as well as the green initiatives that are out there for every single company about reducing carbon footprints and things like that. If you're not using something in a data center, turn it off. Reduce that power cost, reduce that cooling cost, and potentially also, looking at it from a licensing perspective as well.
Hey, Jeremy, did I miss the section where it tells you how to go get access to this thing?
At the bottom.
It's at the very bottom.
Yeah, so I did a little
right above. There's more to come, Andy. To fill out this form.
It sounds like, so just to answer a couple of questions, Andy, you said, how do we get access to this earlier? It looks like we are tech preview soon. And you should get a notification. So this is actually pretty big if you're a cloud customer, which makes sense in this case. But you'll get pops when you log into the cloud console that will tell you about new features. So be on the lookout for this one. So you should get a pop for this in your console. There are certain things that are tech preview that you can turn on from within your cloud tenant when you log in. So there is 2 things. One, the Podio form looks like it's tied to Activity Manager, so that might be something you go turn on there. But secondly, just be on the lookout in your cloud console. So you log in sometime soon, you should get a pop to go turn this thing on. So just be aware of that.
Well, I think it was you that just said it. Maybe it was Bill or Todd. This is big because this is what end users are going to see. So don't do this trivially. I guess based on what you're thinking, Jeremy, is this something you turn on for yourself individually, or does your administrator turn it on for the organization?
I gotta feel that this is probably something that would be organization wide.
Yeah, I would agree.
So when you look at some of the other features that get turned off and on, things like files, things like micro apps, which I know are deprecated, those are things that you could turn on, but that would be organization wide. So I got to imagine this probably falls in that bucket.
Every time I hear somebody say that micro apps, I thought micro apps was a phenomenal idea. I just don't think people ran with it the way they should have.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, Andy. I wouldn't disagree with you.
That sounds like it's a whole separate session by itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it says more to come. I know Geremy indicated a minute ago he was part of the sessions talking about this change. Geremy, cats you can let out of the bag on what to expect next?
No, I think this is kind of where we landed. Some of the customer sessions that I were a part of, they was really sort of soliciting feedback around some of the UI changes. So, I was kind of curious to see where we ended up landing. So this is pretty neat, actually.
Yeah. Todd, if you had a magic wand, what would you want to see happen next in the workspace?
Probably next in the workspace, some way to get back to identifying, what are your common tasks that are happening, right? So maybe put some intelligence in there. So, hey, it's a Monday. Pre-launch some of these applications when I first log into the workspace on Monday morning. I'll have, my Salesforce instance pop up. Here's my tasks for the week. Kind of that micro app approach, except instead of launching the actual micro app itself, maybe, here's my favorites for the day, or here's some of the workflows. And once again, it's kind of driving towards that workflow, that intelligent workflow approach as we go.
So, Bill, I've got some ideas, but I want to hear yours. What anything you'd wanting to wish list?
Well, one thing, obviously, I mean, I like what Todd said, and that's definitely one thing that I would consider. The other thing that comes to mind immediately is bringing these same changes to the storefront interface, which earlier in the article it did indicate that they are actively working on improvements. Whether or not all those improvements will make it here, who knows? But I certainly think we'll see some, if not all of this or most of this, come to the storefront experience. But to Todd's point, I actually had a customer a number of years ago who said when pre-launch and such was announced and put into the product, he wanted to tie his HID card readers to Citrix so that when someone scanned out of the parking deck into their office, it could go ahead and pre-launch their apps. I always thought that was a fascinating concept. I don't think they ever made it happen, but certainly would be something that would be interesting.
Yeah, years ago, Cisco had something like that for their hoteling space,
Right.
Where when you'd sign into the kiosk at the front desk, it would actually direct you to the desk that was available for you. And by the time you got there, your session would know, what your closest printer is. It would update your work location. It would transfer your phone to that desk.
Oh, wow.
And things like that. So, and that was a very complicated system to put together.
Yeah.
And probably if you weren't Cisco, it was probably very expensive.
So guys, this may already exist. So I may be asking for something that I just don't have turned on. I want files to be there, but I want files to be not just Citrix files, share file now. I want OneDrive files to be there. And I want, when I click on it, for it to be really intuitive and searchable within my OneDrive files. So I don't have to leave this one workspace to go dig into OneDrive further and then be able to launch something either using M365 apps or native app or a published app through Citrix.
That's an interesting concept, Andy. I mean, so I wonder about once I see the files and I click a file, like what do I want to happen once I've explored my OneDrive, my Google Drive, whatever I'm using, what's that UI look like? Well, it's probably editing within O365, right? Or it's editing within my G Suite. Maybe that is where instead of files, maybe there's a tie-in with, we've got the SSO with the workspace browser. I can click, my files and have it open up my O365 UI, my Microsoft UI. I can do single sign on into that, right? So maybe it's kind of already there. It's just not a files node anymore. It's a published SaaS app, right? That takes me right in. I mean, I see where you're going with this. I'm trying to figure out a way to make that workflow seamless.
So I blew up what's on the screen here, and the files one's gone, which is fine. I guess I'd like to have it back. If I went to search workspace at the top, I would like for it to search not only Citrix files, but
OneDrive.
Search my OneDrive file and my Google, and all in one place. I can't tell you how many times a day I have to go to 3 different cloud storage areas to look for a file.
Yeah, that struggle is real.
Yeah. The other one I'd like, and Todd made me think of this, was I'd love it if I had my Outlook calendar or whatever my calendar is to somehow show up on the screen, either overlaid or whatever. Just while I'm here, I can be reminded, you got a meeting coming up in 15 minutes.
Yeah, I feel like Andy's saying that because that stings sometimes. It happens more often than he would like to admit.
Or for it to start flashing, okay, you got a meeting starting in 10 minutes. You're still over here in this other thing. You
Right.
guys have heard me. I start every meeting with, sorry, I'm late. And I'm not trying to be.
And I think the way to solve that is to continuously provide that as feedback to your partner or your Citrix rep, or anytime you get asked what could be improved, provide that as information.
Well, there's no doubt it will keep evolving in multiple ways. That's how this as a service stuff works. And then, as Bill was pointing out, maybe some of that trickles down to the on-premises version. Guys, appreciate the time. Sorry, I've been gone for a couple of weeks. You guys have been knocking it out without me. I've got a bunch of podcasts to get posted. Excited to get those up and get the world up to speed on what you guys have been talking about.
Excellent. Good to have you back, Andy.
Excellent.
Yep. Good for you to be back.
Guys, I appreciate it. And we will talk again next week. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
See you, fellas.